The Duchess stood alone in her own ballroom, watching her husband's mistress wear her jewels. Tonight, on Elara's 32nd birthday, the court had gathered not to honor her, but to witness her erasure. The necklace glittering at Seline's throat had been meant for starving villages. The man who'd sworn vows now escorted another woman through a doors Elara's bloodline had defended for generations. She had one choice: vanish quietly into history, or force them all to remember why northern women don't break. If you want to see how a woman fights back when the entire world expects her to disappear, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The candles had been burning for 3 hours, and still no one had wished Elara a happy birthday. She stood near the entrance to the great hall, hands folded precisely at her waist, watching servants arrange platters of roasted fowl and winter vegetables across tables that could seat 40. The stone walls exhaled cold despite the fires roaring in twin hearths. Outside, wind screamed across the northern plains, battering shutters and rattling the ancient iron hinges her great-grandfather had commissioned during the border wars. "Your Grace." The head steward, Greaves, appeared at her elbow. His voice carried the apologetic tone of a man delivering bad news he didn't cause. "The musicians have arrived, but there's some confusion about seating arrangements." "What kind of confusion?" Greaves glanced toward the high table, where place cards had been set since morning. "The Duke requested changes. Lady Seline is to be seated prominently." Elara's jaw tightened, but her expression didn't shift. "Define prominently." "To his right, Your Grace." The Duchess's right. Her seat. The one her mother had occupied for 26 years before fever took her. The one that signified partnership in rule, not just marriage. Elara looked at Greaves, a man who'd served her family since before she was born, and saw the discomfort in his weathered face. "Where am I to sit?" The Duke suggested, "Further down, near the counselors." Near the counselors, with the functionaries and record keepers, people whose names she barely knew. She might as well be seated in the kitchens. "I see." Elara's voice came out level, almost pleasant. "And when did my husband communicate this revision?" "An hour ago, Your Grace, through Lady Seline's attendant." "Not even directly. Through servants, through her servants." Elara turned away before Greaves could see whatever emotion tried to surface. She walked toward the windows overlooking the courtyard where torches illuminated falling snow. Her reflection stared back from the darkened glass, a woman in a gown of deep blue velvet, her mother's gown, altered to fit her narrower frame. The fabric was 15 years out of fashion, the embroidery old-style, intricate patterns of winter roses and defensive towers. She'd chosen it deliberately. In a court that increasingly valued whatever was new and glittering, she'd wrapped herself in history. "Your Grace?" She didn't turn. "Proceed with the Duke's arrangements, Greaves. I'll sit wherever I'm placed." She heard him hesitate, then retreat. His footsteps echoed against stone, swallowed by the cavernous space. The hall was beautiful, she had to admit. She'd overseen the preparations herself, the garlands of evergreen, the silver candlesticks polished until they blazed, the careful selection of wines from the estate's deepest cellars. Her birthday fell in the darkest week of winter, when the northern territories locked into a cold so profound that supply lines froze and villages went silent for months. Traditionally, the Duchess's birthday banquet served as the court's last major gathering before everyone retreated into survival mode. Traditionally, it honored the woman who kept the duchy functioning when snow made governance impossible. This year felt different. This year felt like a funeral. "Magnificent work, as always." The voice came from behind her, smooth and entirely unwelcome. Elara turned to find Seline approaching, her gown a shimmering gold that caught firelight and threw it back in warm, seductive waves. She was younger than Elara by 5 years, daughter of a minor southern house that had gambled everything on beauty and won. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken 2 servants 3 hours. Diamonds, not heirloom pieces but new acquisitions, sparkled at her ears and wrists. "Lady Seline." Elara's tone could have frozen the wine. "How kind of you to attend." "I wouldn't miss it." Seline smiled, the expression somehow both friendly and predatory. 32 is such an important year, still young enough to be interesting, old enough to have learned wisdom. The implication hung between them like smoke. "You're aging. I'm ascendant." Elara said nothing. She'd learned years ago that silence unnerved people more than clever retorts. Seline glanced around the hall, her gaze appraising. The decorations are lovely, very traditional. Alistair mentioned you handled everything personally. The duchy has standards? Of course. Celine's fingers traced the edge of a nearby table, though I did suggest to Alistair that perhaps a more contemporary approach might better reflect the court's current energy. All this darkness and formality, it feels like we're attending a wake. There it was. The casual diminishment, the suggestion that Elara's choices were outdated, morbid, wrong, that she herself was the problem. The Northern Territories have survived 600 winters, Elara said quietly. We honor that survival. If it seems somber to Southern sensibilities, perhaps that's because survival isn't always festive. Celine's smile didn't waver. Perhaps it's time to let a little warmth in. Winter doesn't last forever. Here it does. The silence that followed felt sharp enough to draw blood. Celine's eyes flickered, just briefly, with something that might have been respect or might have been hatred. Then she laughed, light and musical. Well, I should finish dressing. Alistair is waiting. She turned, then paused. Oh, you'll adore your gift. He put such thought into it. She swept away, gold fabric trailing like a comet's tail, leaving Elara alone with the crawling realization that her husband had discussed birthday gifts with his mistress, that they'd planned this together, that tonight was designed not just to humiliate her, but to do so publicly, irrevocably, with witnesses who would carry the story across the entire region. Elara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold stone windowsill, forcing steadiness back into her fingers. In the courtyard below, carriages were beginning to arrive. The provincial governors, the military commanders, the merchant lords who controlled trade routes, people whose support determined whether the duchy thrived or collapsed, people who would watch tonight's performance and make calculations about where to place their loyalty. Your Grace. A different servant, younger, nervous. The Duke requests your presence in the receiving chamber. Of course he did. Couldn't even greet her privately, had to summon her like a functionary. Elara straightened her spine, checked her reflection one final time, and walked through corridors she'd known since childhood. The receiving chamber was smaller, more intimate, meant for family gatherings before formal events. Her father had given her writing lessons in the courtyard visible through its windows. Her mother had taught her household management at the desk in the corner. Alistair stood near the fire, already dressed in formal black and silver, the ducal chain heavy across his shoulders. He'd always been handsome, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of aristocratic features that looked carved rather than born. They'd married when she was 19 and he was 25, a political arrangement that had seemed, at the time, reasonably promising. He'd been respectful, if not warm. She'd been dutiful, if not passionate. Somewhere in the 8 years since, respectful had curdled into resentment. Elara. He didn't meet her eyes. You look well. Thank you. We should discuss tonight's proceedings. I'm aware of the seating changes. That made him glance up. Greaves spoke to you. Did you expect him not to? Alistair's jaw worked. It's not personal. Seline has been instrumental in negotiating with the Southern trade delegations. It's appropriate to recognize her contributions by giving her my seat, by acknowledging reality. His voice hardened. The court respects results, Elara. Not titles, not history. What have you accomplished lately besides maintaining traditions no one cares about? The words landed like blows. Elara absorbed them, processed them, filed them away. I maintained the duchy's stability while you pursued Southern interests. Stability. He laughed, bitter. Is that what you call resistance to every modernization I propose? We could be thriving, Elara. Instead, we're frozen in time because you refuse to adapt. I refuse to abandon the principles that kept these territories alive for 6 centuries. Those principles are strangling us. The shout echoed against stone. Alistair visibly collected himself, smoothing his expression back into ducal composure. Tonight is important. The trade delegations need to see unified leadership. I expect you to be gracious. Gracious. Yes. Supportive. Cooperative. He stepped closer and she caught the scent of wine on his breath. He'd been drinking already. This is happening, Elara. Whether you accept it or not, Seline will be recognized. The court will adapt. You can either be part of that future or become irrelevant to it. There it was, The ultimatum delivered in her own receiving chamber, on her birthday, in the home her ancestors had built. Elara looked at the man she'd married and saw a stranger, someone who'd traded partnership for ambition, duty for desire, legacy for immediate gratification, someone who'd convinced himself that cruelty was strategy. "I understand," she said softly. Alistair studied her face, clearly expecting more resistance. When none came, he seemed almost disappointed. "Good. The guests will arrive shortly. I'll see you in the hall." He left without another word. Elara stood alone in the receiving chamber, listening to his footsteps fade, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Not defeat. Not surrender. Clarity. She'd spent 8 years trying to be the wife Alistair wanted, the Duchess the court expected, the daughter her parents would be proud of. She'd negotiated, compromised, adapted to every shifting demand while maintaining the core responsibilities no one else would touch. She'd kept the granaries stocked, the roads maintained, the border villages supplied. She'd done the unglamorous work of governance while Alistair chased grander ambitions. And for what? To be humiliated at her own birthday banquet? To watch a mistress wear her seat like a trophy? No. Elara walked to the window and looked out at the frozen landscape. Snow fell heavy and constant, accumulating in drifts that would make travel impossible within days. The Northern Territories didn't forgive weakness. They didn't reward fantasy. You survived by understanding reality and acting accordingly, or you died. She'd been trying to save a marriage that was already dead, trying to preserve a partnership Alistair had abandoned. The realization should have hurt, but instead it felt like freedom. If tonight was meant to erase her, she'd make sure they remembered why erasure was necessary. If Alistair wanted to replace her with someone softer, more pliable, more decorative, she'd remind the court exactly what happened when you prioritized aesthetics over function in a region where winter killed the unprepared. She had no intention of vanishing quietly. The first guests arrived just after sunset. Elara stood in the receiving line, positioned, notably, 3 steps behind Alistair and Seline, and watched the court's reaction. Some people greeted her warmly, their discomfort obvious. Others barely acknowledged her presence, their attention fixed on the glittering woman at the Duke's side. Governor Thorne, a grizzled military man who'd served her father, clasped her hand briefly. "Your Grace, the hall looks magnificent." "Thank you, Governor. How are the border garrisons?" "Undermanned and undersupplied, as always this time of year." His eyes flicked toward Alistair, then back. "We could use the winter relief funds soon." "I'm working on it." "I'm sure you are." He moved on, but the exchange hadn't gone unnoticed. Several counselors had heard, including old Lord Pemberton, whose family controlled the northern mines. The receiving line continued. Each greeting felt like a small battlefield, every word carrying weight beyond its surface meaning. Elara smiled, thanked people for coming, accepted vague birthday wishes, and watched. Always watched. Seline, she noticed, was good at this. The younger woman had mastered the art of seeming interested without actually listening, of making every person feel momentarily special. It was a performer's skill, and Elara could admit, privately, bitterly, that it was effective. What Seline lacked was depth. When Governor Thorne mentioned garrison supplies, she'd smiled blankly. When Lady Ashford brought up the textile mill's winter production, Seline had changed the subject to fashion. She knew how to charm, not how to govern. The question was whether the court cared about the difference. When the last guests entered, Alistair offered his arm to Seline, not his wife, and led the procession into the great hall. Elara followed at a distance that felt deliberately calculated to minimize her importance. She found her assigned seat halfway down the high table, between a minor trade official and the Duchy's master of records, a quiet man named Halford, who spent most social events reading documents. The insult was comprehensive, not just the demotion from the Duchess's seat, but the placement among people with no real power or influence. She might as well be invisible. Elara sat, arranged her skirts, and accepted wine from a nervous servant. The hall filled with conversation, laughter, the clatter of plates and cutlery. At the table's head, Alistair and Seline held court, surrounded by sycophants and social climbers. No one approached Elara's section. She sipped her wine and observed. Dinner was elaborate. 7 courses, each more extravagant than necessary given the season's constraints. Roasted quail with cherry reduction, winter vegetables in herb butter, venison braised in wine, pastries filled with preserved fruits that should have been rationed for the spring shortage. Someone had raided the ducal stores comprehensively, and Elara knew exactly who'd authorized it. Between the fourth and fifth courses, Alistair stood. The hall quieted instantly. "My friends," he began, his voice carrying that practiced authority that had once impressed her, "we gather tonight to celebrate not just my wife's birthday," he gestured vaguely in Elara's direction, "but the duchy's future. These are times of change, of growth, of new possibilities." Elara's fingers tightened on her wine glass. "For too long," Alistair continued, "we've been bound by old fears, old limitations. The northern territories have survived, yes, but survival isn't victory. It's time we thrived." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elara recognized the rhetoric, the same speeches he'd been giving for months, always positioning her careful governance as cowardice, her preservation of resources as failure of imagination. "Tonight, I want to honor someone who embodies that forward vision." Alistair turned to Seline, who'd arranged her features into an expression of humble surprise that was entirely calculated. Lady Seline has worked tirelessly to forge new trade relationships, to bring southern prosperity north, to help us imagine a future beyond mere endurance. He produced a velvet box from inside his jacket. The hall went dead silent. Elara's heart stopped. She recognized that box. She'd last seen it in the ducal treasury 3 weeks ago, when she'd been inventorying assets for the winter relief program. Inside was the North March necklace, a stunning piece of diamonds and sapphires worth enough to feed 3 border villages through the entire winter. It had been earmarked, designated, promised to the relief fund in writing. Alistair opened the box with a flourish. Candlelight caught the stones, sending fractured rainbows across the ceiling. Gasps echoed through the hall, genuine ones, because the necklace was genuinely spectacular. "For your dedication," Alistair said, lifting the necklace and fastening it around Celine's throat. "And your vision." The hall erupted in applause. Seline touched the necklace with trembling fingers, her eyes bright with tears that might have been real or might have been performance. She rose, embraced Alistair publicly, lingeringly, and the message couldn't have been clearer if he'd announced their affair with trumpets. This was the Duchess now. This glittering, charming southern woman who knew nothing about winter but looked beautiful accepting stolen jewels. Elara sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure while her mind worked at furious speed. Every eye in the hall had turned toward her, waiting for reaction, waiting to see her crumble, retreat, provide the final confirmation that she'd been replaced. She saw Governor Thorne watching her with something like pity, saw Lady Ashford's scandalized expression, saw Lord Pemberton's calculating gaze measuring her response against future political calculations, saw Halford, the master of records beside her, very quietly slide a leather portfolio across the table. She glanced down. Inside were documents, inventory reports, treasury authorizations, her own signature on forms designating the North March necklace specifically, explicitly, for winter relief. Halford didn't look at her, didn't speak, just calmly cut his venison as if he'd done nothing at all. Elara's mind crystallized. Not just clarity now, but strategy. She stood. The movement cut through the applause like a knife. Conversations died. Heads turned. Alistair, still standing with his arm around Seline, finally looked at his wife. Elara raised her wine glass. Her hand was steady. "A toast," she said clearly, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Seems appropriate." Alistair's expression flickered. Surprise, then annoyance, then something that might have been nervousness, but he couldn't refuse without appearing churlish. He nodded. The entire court raised their glasses, hundreds of eyes fixed on the Duchess in the old-fashioned blue gown, standing alone halfway down the high table. Elara smiled. Not the practiced court smile she'd worn for 8 years, but something genuine, something with teeth. "To survival," she began, "and the strength it requires." She paused, letting the words settle. The hall was so quiet she could hear logs crackling in the fireplaces. "This duchy was founded in blood and winter. My ancestors, our ancestors, carved civilization from frozen ground because they understood a simple truth. Beauty doesn't survive cold. Charm doesn't fill granaries. Good intentions don't feed border villages when supply lines freeze. Celine's smile was starting to look strained. Alistair shifted his weight. Elara continued, her voice never rising but somehow filling the vast space. Every woman who wore the Duchess's title learned this. My mother knew it. Her mother before her. We are not here to be decorative. We are here to make impossible decisions, to bear the weight of other people's survival, to do the unglamorous work that keeps civilization functioning when nature itself becomes hostile. She took a breath, then turned to face Alistair and Seline directly. Which brings me to tonight's generous gift. The North March necklace, truly spectacular, worth approximately 40,000 crowns at current market valuation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. That was more than most of them earned in 5 years. 40,000 crowns, Elara repeated, that were formally allocated 3 weeks ago to the Winter Relief Fund, specifically designated to purchase grain for the Grey March, Thornhold, and Silverstream villages, which are expected to face severe shortages before spring thaw. The murmurs turned to gasps. Celine's hand flew to the necklace as if it had suddenly burned her. Alistair's face went rigid. I have the documentation, Elara said calmly, gesturing to Halford's portfolio. Signed, witnessed, filed with the Treasury. Perhaps there was some confusion. Perhaps the Duke forgot. Perhaps someone believed that pretty stones matter more than hungry children. The silence was absolute now. No one was eating, no one was drinking. Every person in the hall was frozen, watching the impossible unfold, a dismissed duchess refusing to disappear. So I propose a revision to tonight's toast, Elara said, her voice cutting like winter wind. Not to visions and possibilities, but to reality, to the actual work of governance, to knowing the difference between investment and indulgence, to remembering that in the North, every choice has consequences, and those consequences are measured in lives, not applause. She raised her glass higher. To survival, she finished. May we all be wise enough to pursue it. She drank. The wine was bitter and perfect. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. Then, slowly, Governor Thorne stood and raised his glass. To survival. Lord Pemberton rose next, then Lady Ashford, then the trade officials, the minor nobles, the military commanders. One by one, the court stood, not for Alistair's vision, not for Celine's charm, but for the cold, hard mathematics of winter governance. The last to rise were Alistair and Seline themselves, trapped by protocol, forced to toast a declaration that had just publicly destroyed them. When the hall finally emptied hours later, after stilted conversations and careful exits, Elara remained at her seat, the portfolio of documents still open before her. She'd won tonight's battle, but the war was just beginning. Outside, snow fell heavier. Winter had arrived in full, and Elara had just reminded everyone why northern women ruled it. The first consequence arrived before dawn. Elara hadn't slept. She'd returned to her private chambers after the banquet and spent the dark hours going through records Halford had quietly delivered. Treasury documents, grain inventories, correspondence with border villages that painted a picture far grimmer than she'd realized. While she'd been trying to preserve her marriage, Alistair had been systematically redirecting resources. The North March necklace wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. She was reading a letter from the Grey March village elder when her lady's maid, Margot, knocked softly. Your Grace, the Duke requests your presence in the council chamber. Immediately. Elara looked up from the letter describing children rationing single meals across 2 days. What time is it? Just past 5, Your Grace. Before sunrise. Before witnesses. Alistair was moving fast. Tell him I'll arrive shortly. Margot hesitated. Your Grace, he said immediately. He seemed angry. I'm sure he did. Elara set down the letter and stood, still wearing last night's blue gown. She hadn't bothered changing. Let him wait 5 minutes. I need to dress appropriately for whatever accusations he's planning. She chose a severe gray wool dress, high-necked and unadorned, the kind of thing her mother had worn for difficult council sessions. Armor disguised as clothing. The council chamber was on the 2nd floor, overlooking the frozen courtyard. Elara walked there alone, her footsteps echoing against stone corridors lit by guttering torches. Dawn was starting to gray the windows, but full light wouldn't reach the northern territories for another hour. Alistair was waiting inside with 3 people. Seline, still wearing the North March necklace, Lord Chancellor Wickham, the Duchy's chief legal advisor, and Commander Vorenus, who led the ducal guard. The arrangement was deliberate: Seline for emotional warfare, Wickham for legal authority, Vorenus for intimidation. "Sit," Alistair said, not looking at her. Elara remained standing. "I prefer not to." "That wasn't a request." "Then rephrase it as one." Color rose in Alistair's face, but Wickham cleared his throat. "Your Grace, please. This needn't be confrontational." "Interesting choice of words, given the company." Elara glanced at Vorenus, whose hand rested casually on his sword hilt. "Am I under arrest?" "Don't be dramatic," Alistair snapped. "We need to discuss your behavior last night." "My behavior?" "You humiliated me in front of the entire court. You made baseless accusations. I provided documentation designed to undermine my authority and sabotage important diplomatic relationships." Alistair finally looked at her, and his eyes held something cold and final. "You've become a liability, Elara. To me, to the Duchy, to everyone who depends on stable leadership." The word liability hung in the air like poison. Elara felt Margot's earlier warning crystallize into understanding. This wasn't a conversation. It was a trial. "You allocated Duchy resources for personal gifts," she said calmly. "I simply made that allocation public. If you feel humiliated, perhaps examine your choices, not my documentation." Seline spoke for the first time, her voice honeyed and reasonable. "Your Grace, no one questions your dedication, but surely you understand how your actions appeared. To weaponize a birthday celebration, to turn a generous gesture into scandal, it suggests a certain instability." There it was, the narrative they'd prepared. Not theft, not corruption, not the systematic betrayal of governance responsibilities, but instability. The Duchess losing her mind, becoming unreliable, unfit for her position. Elara looked at Wickham. "Is there a formal charge being brought?" The Chancellor shifted uncomfortably. "Not precisely a charge, Your Grace. However, given the concerns raised about your judgment, my judgment allocated relief funds appropriately. The Duke's judgment gave those funds to his mistress as jewelry. Which of us demonstrates poor thinking? You see?" Alistair gestured as if she'd proven his point. "This hostility, this refusal to accept reality. I accept reality perfectly well. You're attempting to remove me from my position because I wouldn't quietly endorse your affair or your financial recklessness. The question is whether the Duchy's laws permit that removal." Wickham coughed. "The relevant statutes are complex. In cases of documented incapacity, I'm not incapacitated." "Mental stability is difficult to quantify." "Then quantify my governance. Border villages supplied? Yes. Granaries maintained? Yes. Trade agreements honored? Yes. The only thing I've failed to do is pretend this farce is legitimate." Vorenus cleared his throat. "Your Grace, perhaps. Commander, are you here to arrest me or witness this performance?" The guard commander looked supremely uncomfortable. "Neither, Your Grace. The Duke requested I attend for security purposes." "Whose security?" No one answered that. Elara turned back to Alistair, who was gripping the edge of the council table hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, voice tight and controlled. "You're going to issue a public apology for last night's disruption. You're going to acknowledge that you misunderstood the necklace's status. I didn't misunderstand anything. And you're going to adopt a more cooperative attitude toward Duchy business going forward. If you can't manage that, we'll be forced to consider more formal interventions." Such as a competency review? Such as temporary removal from public duties? Such as confinement to private quarters for your own well-being? Alistair's smile was knife-thin. "The Northern Territories are harsh, Elara. Accidents happen. Women lose their balance on icy stairs. They fall ill from winter fevers. They simply disappear." The threat wasn't even veiled. Elara felt ice slide down her spine, but kept her expression neutral. "You'd murder me rather than admit theft?" "I'd protect the Duchy from destructive influences." Alistair stood. "You have until noon to decide. Apologize and cooperate, or face consequences. Those are your options." He left without waiting for response, Seline gliding after him like a golden shadow. Wickham gathered his papers with obvious discomfort, avoiding Elara's gaze. Only Vorenus remained, standing awkwardly near the door. "Commander, Elara said quietly. A question. Your Grace, if the Duke orders my arrest on fabricated charges, will you follow that order? Vorenus was silent for a long moment. I serve the Duchy, Your Grace. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give. He met her eyes, and she saw conflict there. For what it's worth, your mother was a great woman. She wouldn't have tolerated this. My mother had a husband who honored his vows. Yes, Your Grace, she did. Vorenus left, closing the door softly behind him. Elara stood alone in the council chamber as dawn finally broke through the windows, turning ice-covered glass into fractured diamonds. Her husband had just threatened her life. Not metaphorically, not implicitly, directly. Apologize or face consequences that included murder. She had until noon. The walk back to her chambers felt longer than usual, every shadow suddenly suspicious. Margot was waiting, her face pale. Your Grace, the entire staff knows. About the meeting, about the ultimatum. Some of the younger servants are talking about leaving before... She stopped, unable to finish. Before I'm arrested or killed? Margot flinched. Your Grace, what will you do? Elara moved to her desk, where Halford's documents still lay scattered. Evidence of systematic corruption, of villages being slowly starved to fund Alistair's ambitions. Evidence that would mean nothing if she was locked away or dead. Margot, I need you to do something. It's dangerous. Anything, Your Grace. Find Halford. Tell him to secure all treasury documents, copies, originals, everything. Then take them to Governor Thorne. Not here, not in any official building. Thorne's private residence. Can you do that? The Duke's guards watch the treasury, which is why you'll go now, while they're changing shifts. Halford knows the back ways. Tell him I said the word Wintermarsh. He'll understand. Margot nodded and fled. Elara turned to the window, watching servants move through the courtyard below. Normal people doing normal work, unaware that their Duchess was being systematically erased. She had 3 choices, none good. 1. Apologize. Submit. Become a decorative prisoner in her own home while Alistair and Seline dismantled everything her family had built. Safe, but meaningless. 2. Fight openly. Refuse the ultimatum. Dare Alistair to follow through on his threats. Brave, but likely fatal. 3. Something else. Something unexpected that changed the entire game. Her mind worked through possibilities, discarding options as quickly as they formed. She couldn't flee. Where would she go in winter, with guards watching every gate? She couldn't appeal to higher authority. The duchy was sovereign, answerable only to itself. She couldn't rely on the court's loyalty. Last night had shown that people chose survival over principle when pressed. What did she have that Alistair didn't? Knowledge. 8 years of intimate understanding of how the duchy actually functioned, not just its public face, but its hidden mechanisms. She knew which servants owed their positions to her mother's patronage. She knew which trade routes depended on relationships she'd personally cultivated. She knew where the real power lay beneath the ceremonial titles. And she knew one thing Alistair had forgotten. The Northern Territories answered to winter before they answered to dukes. The idea formed slowly, terrifyingly. So risky it made her hands shake. But possible. She had until noon, 4 hours to prepare, to move pieces into position, to gamble everything on a strategy that would either save her or destroy whatever remained of her life. Elara pulled out fresh paper and began writing letters. By mid-morning, the duchy was buzzing with rumors. Servants whispered in corners. Guards exchanged glances. The court waited to see whether their duchess would bend or break. Elara did neither. At 1:45 she walked into the great hall, not the council chamber where Alistair expected her, and found it already filling with people. She'd sent precise invitations. Every provincial governor, every military commander, every merchant lord who controlled supply lines. The people who made the duchy function regardless of who held ceremonial power. Governor Thorne saw her first and nodded grimly. He'd received Halford's documents. He understood. Lord Pemberton arrived next, his mining contingent behind him. Then Lady Ashford with representatives from the textile guilds. Then the agricultural overseers, the trade commissioners, the village elders who'd made the winter journey specifically for this. Alistair arrived at noon exactly, Seline at his side, and stopped dead when he saw the crowd. What is this? An emergency assembly, Elara said calmly. As is my right as Duchess during times of critical resource allocation. I'm invoking the winter protocols. The room went silent. The Winter Protocols were ancient law, dating to the duchy's founding, provisions that gave the Duchess absolute authority over resource management during crisis periods. They'd been used exactly 7 times in 600 years, always during catastrophic situations. Wickham stepped forward, stammering, "Your Grace, the Winter Protocols require evidence of imminent crisis." "Which I have," Elara gestured to Halford, who stood near the back with an entire cart of documents. "Master of Records, please present the Treasury analysis." Halford cleared his throat, visibly nervous but committed. "Based on current inventories and expenditures, the Duchy will face critical grain shortages in the Grey March, Thornhold, and Silverstream regions within 6 weeks. Current relief allocations are insufficient by approximately 40%. Additionally, winter road maintenance has been deferred for 3 seasons, putting spring supply lines at risk. The Treasury has been depleted by non-essential expenditures totaling," he consulted his papers, 160,000 crowns over 18 months. Gasps echoed through the hall. 160,000 crowns was enough to feed the entire duchy for a year. "Lies," Seline said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Documentation is available for review," Halford continued, "including this." He held up a familiar velvet box. The North March necklace, appraised value 40,000 crowns, allocated for relief funds, instead presented as personal gift. Alistair's face had gone from red to white. "This is a coup. You're attempting to seize power. I'm preventing famine," Elara's voice cut through his bluster. "The Winter Protocols exist precisely for this situation, when ceremonial leadership prioritizes personal interests over survival. Under these provisions, I'm assuming direct control of all resource allocation, treasury management, and supply line coordination until the crisis is resolved. You can't." "I can. The law is explicit. Governor Thorne, you've reviewed the statutes?" Thorne stepped forward. "I have, Your Grace. The protocols are clear. In times of documented resource crisis, the Duchess holds emergency powers superseding ducal authority in matters of supplies and civilian welfare." "This is insanity," Alistair turned to the assembled crowd. "She's manipulating you all. Those documents are fabricated." "My signature is on half of them," Lord Pemberton said dryly. "Are you suggesting I fabricated my own correspondence?" "The mining shipments diverted south," Lady Ashford added, "were redirected without my authorization. I've been trying to understand why for months. One by one, the people who actually ran the Duchy's operations spoke up. Not with dramatic accusations, but with quiet confirmations of what Elara's documents showed. Systematic mismanagement, resources flowing away from critical needs toward Alistair's vision of Southern-style prosperity. Commander Varanus hadn't moved. He stood near the wall, hand no longer on his sword, watching everything with an expression Elara couldn't read. Alistair looked around the room, seeing support crumble, and his face twisted into something ugly. "You're making a mistake, all of you. When this farce ends, and it will end, I'll remember who stood where." "Good," Elara said quietly. "So will I." She turned to address the assembly. "Under the Winter Protocols, I'm ordering the following. First, immediate audit of all Treasury expenditures for the past 2 years. Second, reallocation of non-essential items, including jewelry, artwork, and luxury goods, to be liquidated for relief funds. Third, emergency grain purchases from Southern reserves before roads become impassable." "You'll bankrupt us," Seline said desperately. "No, I'll keep people alive. There's a difference." Elara continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "Fourth, all supply line decisions will route through a civilian oversight committee, not ducal decree. Fifth, monthly public accounting of resource allocation until spring thaw." She paused, then delivered the final blow. "And sixth, I'm requesting formal investigation into misuse of duchy funds by ducal authority. Governor Thorne, will you chair that investigation?" Thorne didn't hesitate. "I will, Your Grace." The shift in the room was palpable. This wasn't just emergency management. It was a complete inversion of power. Elara had just stripped Alistair of his authority over everything that mattered, using laws he'd forgotten existed and support he'd assumed didn't exist. Alistair stood frozen, Seline beside him, both of them suddenly looking small and exposed. The court that had applauded her humiliation last night now watched her systematically dismantle her husband's control. "This isn't over," Alistair said, voice shaking with rage. "You think you've won? You've just declared war." "No," Elara corrected. "I've declared survival. If you interpret that as war, examine your priorities." She dismissed the assembly, watching people file out with new purpose. Some looked relieved. Others looked calculating, already repositioning themselves around the new power structure. Human nature in crisis. Adapt or die. Governor Thorne lingered. "Your Grace, that was extraordinary, but you understand what you've done? Made enemies of my husband and his mistress? Made yourself a target." Thorne's voice dropped. "The Duke still controls the military. The Guard answers to him, not you. The Winter Protocols give you authority over resources, not soldiers." "I know." "Then you know he can still have you arrested, removed, killed." "He can try." Thorne studied her face. "Your mother would be proud. Terrified, but proud." He left, taking the investigation documents with him. Elara stood alone in the Great Hall for the second time in 12 hours. Her gambit had worked. The court was behind her. The laws were on her side. The evidence was secured. But Thorne was right. She'd just backed Alistair into a corner, and cornered animals were dangerous. She returned to her chambers to find Margot waiting, pale and shaking. "Your Grace, the Duke's guards searched your rooms while you were in the assembly. They took papers, personal items, everything from your writing desk." "Looking for what?" "I don't know, but, Your Grace..." Margot's voice dropped to a whisper. "I overheard 2 guards talking. They said the Duke has sent riders south, to his family's estates. They're bringing reinforcements." Elara's blood went cold. Reinforcements meant soldiers. Soldiers who owed loyalty to Alistair's family line, not the duchy itself. Soldiers who would follow orders without questioning legality. "How many riders?" 3 that I saw, but there could be more." 3 riders meant serious numbers, at least 50 soldiers, possibly 100. Enough to overwhelm the duchy's regular guard. Enough to stage what would look like a legitimate security action. She had days, maybe a week before those reinforcements arrived. After that, the winter protocols wouldn't matter. Alistair would have the force to simply take control. Elara moved to the window. Snow was falling again, heavy and relentless. In better times, she'd loved watching winter storms, the way they transformed everything, made the world clean and new. Now each snowflake felt like a countdown. She'd won a battle by invoking ancient law and gathering civilian support, but wars weren't won with documents and assemblies. They were won with power, and power in the northern territories ultimately came from one source: the ability to survive winter. An idea formed. Desperate, unprecedented, possibly insane, but possible. "Margot," she said slowly, "find me maps of the northern border routes, and send word to the village elders in Greymarch, Thornhold, and Silverstream. Tell them the Duchess requires their presence, urgently. Your Grace, those villages are 3 days' ride in good weather. In this snow..." "Tell them it's about the relief funds. Tell them their survival depends on it." Elara turned from the window. "And find Commander Varenus. Not officially. Tell him I need to speak with him privately, away from the Duke's eyes." Margot looked terrified, but nodded and left. Elara returned to her desk and began sketching out a plan that would either save the duchy or destroy it completely. She was done playing defense, done reacting to Alistair's moves. If he wanted war, she'd give him one, but fought on terms he'd never anticipate. The Northern Territories had survived 600 winters, not through strength or wealth, but through something else: the absolute commitment of its people to collective survival. Alistair had forgotten that. He'd spent years courting Southern allies, chasing Southern prosperity, trying to make the North into something it wasn't. Elara was about to remind everyone what the North actually was, and what happened to those who betrayed it. Commander Varenus arrived after midnight, alone and wearing civilian clothes. He slipped through the servants' entrance and met Elara in the small library that had once been her mother's study, a room most people had forgotten existed. "This is dangerous for both of us," he said without preamble. "Everything is dangerous now." Elara gestured to a chair, but he remained standing. "How many men do you command who are loyal to the duchy, not the Duke?" Varenus's jaw tightened. "That's a treasonous question." "It's a practical one. Alistair's bringing southern soldiers. When they arrive, you'll be ordered to support whatever action he takes against me. I need to know if you'll follow that order." The commander was silent for a long moment, his scarred hands flexing and releasing. He'd served under Elara's father, fought in the border wars, knew what northern loyalty actually meant. 40 men, he said finally, maybe 50. The rest will do what they're told, especially when there's money involved. The Duke's been paying bonuses to certain guards, building his own force within mine. Names? Does it matter? You can't arrest them without proof, and even with proof, I don't have authority to act against the Duke's direct orders. Elara moved to the window. Snow had stopped falling, leaving the courtyard buried under 3 feet of white. What if I gave you different orders, under the winter protocols? The protocols give you resource authority, not military command. They give me emergency powers during crisis. I'm declaring the incoming soldiers a threat to civilian safety. Vorenus laughed, short and bitter. You're trying to start a civil war with 40 loyal guards against 100 southern mercenaries? That's not strategy, Your Grace. That's suicide. I'm not starting a war. I'm preventing one. Elara turned back to face him. The village elders are coming. Greymarch, Thornhold, Silverstream, the communities most affected by Alistair's theft. When they arrive, I'm asking them to bring their militias. The commander's eyes widened. Border militias? Those aren't soldiers. They're farmers with old weapons. Half of them have never seen real combat. No, but they know winter survival. They know their villages are starving because relief funds became jewelry. And they know that when southern soldiers arrive to enforce the Duke's authority, those villages will be the first casualties of whatever happens next. Vorenus walked to the desk and sat heavily. You're weaponizing desperation. I'm offering an alternative to starvation. There's a difference. Is there? He looked up at her, and she saw the conflict written across his weathered face. Your Grace, I served your father. I watched your mother hold this duchy together through 2 famines and a plague. I respect what you're trying to do. But this plan, it's not just dangerous, it's fragmenting. You're asking civilians to stand against trained soldiers. People will die. People are already dying, quietly, in border villages Alistair doesn't care about. At least this way they die fighting for something. That's cold. That's northern. Elara softened her voice. Commander, I'm not asking you to betray your oaths. I'm asking you to remember what those oaths actually mean. You swore to protect the duchy, not one man's ambition. When those southern soldiers arrive, who do you think they'll protect? The people or the Duke's authority? Vorenus stood and paced, his boots loud against wooden floors. Finally, he stopped. If I support this, if I order my men to stand with civilian militias against the Duke's reinforcements, it's treason, formal, executable treason. Only if we lose. And if we win, what then? You've overthrown your husband, installed yourself as sole ruler through military force. How is that different from what he's doing? Because I'll restore proper governance once the crisis passes. The winter protocols have end dates. His corruption doesn't. The commander studied her face for a long time. You really believe that? That you'll give up emergency power once you have it? My mother did, twice. Your mother had a husband who supported her. You have one actively trying to destroy you. Vorenus moved toward the door, then paused. I need time to think, to talk to my men, to figure out if what you're asking is duty or madness. You have 3 days, maybe 4. After that, the southern soldiers arrive and the choice gets made for us. He nodded and left through the servants' passage, a ghost moving through stone corridors. Elara remained in the library, staring at maps spread across her mother's old desk. Border villages marked in faded ink. Supply routes drawn by hands dead 20 years. The accumulated knowledge of women who'd learned to survive by being harder than winter itself. She was gambling that their lessons would be enough. The village elders arrived over the next 2 days, traveling through snow that should have made the journey impossible. They came because they had no choice. Their communities were facing starvation, and the Duchess had promised solutions. Elder Garrett from Greymarch arrived first, a man in his 60s with frost in his beard and anger in his eyes. Elara met him in the same small library, away from watching guards. Your message said this was about relief funds, Garrett said without greeting. We've been waiting for those funds for 6 weeks. Children are eating once a day, Your Grace. Once. We're rationing grain that should have lasted until spring, and it'll run out by midwinter. I know, I've seen the inventory reports. Then where's the help? Where's the support the duchy promised? Elara handed him the documents Halford had compiled. It went here and here and here. She pointed to expenditure lines. Luxury goods, southern trade delegations, a necklace worth more than your entire village's annual production. Garrett's hand shook as he read. The Duke spent our relief money on jewelry, among other things. I've invoked the winter protocols to stop it, but that's created a different problem. She explained the situation carefully. The southern reinforcements, Alistair's threat, the timeline counting down to confrontation. So you want us to fight your husband's soldiers? Garrett's voice was flat. You want villagers to die in a noble's marriage dispute? No. I want you to fight for your survival. Those soldiers aren't coming to enforce law. They're coming to enforce theft. When they arrive and I'm removed from power, who do you think allocates resources? The Duke who stole from you, or the Duchess trying to feed you? You're using us. Yes. Elara didn't flinch from it. I'm using your desperation and your anger and your justifiable rage at being abandoned. But I'm offering something in return. Actual relief, actual governance, actual acknowledgement that your lives matter. Alistair offers nothing except more of what you're already getting. Garrett set down the papers. What exactly are you asking? Bring your militia. 30 men if you have them, fewer if you don't. Come armed. When the southern soldiers arrive, I need visible support, enough bodies to make violence costly. Not to attack, but to make them think twice about attacking. That's still fighting. That's deterrence. There's a difference. A fine one. The only one available. Elara leaned forward. Elder Garrett, I can't promise this works. I can't promise no one gets hurt. But I can promise that if you do nothing, your village starves. That's not a threat. It's mathematics. The grain won't last. The relief won't come. Winter doesn't care about politics. Garrett was quiet for a long time. The others? Thornhold and Silverstream? Arriving tomorrow. I'm asking them the same thing. You're building an army. I'm building a deterrent. An army fights. I'm hoping visibility alone prevents fighting. Hope isn't strategy, Your Grace. No, but it's all we have. Garrett left without committing, but he didn't refuse either. Elara marked that as the best she could expect. Elder Miriam from Thornhold arrived the next morning with her grandson, a young man named Kyle, who looked barely 20. She was smaller than Elara expected, wiry and sharp-eyed, with the careful movements of someone who'd survived more winters than she'd admit. Garrett sent a rider ahead, Miriam said immediately. Told us what you're planning. Sounds like madness. Probably is. Good. Sane plans don't work in desperate times. Miriam sat without being invited. Thornhold lost 12 people last winter to cold and hunger. We can't afford to lose more. You're saying the Duke stole our relief money? I'm saying he redirected it. The effect is the same. And you want our help to stop him. I want to give you a voice in what happens next. If Alistair wins, you get nothing. If I win, relief funds get restored and you have representation in how they're distributed. Miriam looked at her grandson. Kyle here leads our militia. 23 men, most of them farmers who can shoot straight but never served in real military. You want them to stand against professional soldiers? I want them to stand. Period. Numbers matter. 50 villagers look different than 5. They also die different. Kyle spoke for the first time, his voice younger than his weathered face suggested. Gran, if we do nothing, we're still dying, just slower. Dying slow gives time to find other solutions. What solutions? We've been waiting for relief for 2 months. The Duchy forgot us. He looked at Elara. You're asking us to fight, but you're also acknowledging we exist. That's more than we've gotten in years. Miriam's expression hardened, but Elara saw the calculation happening. Finally, the elder nodded. We'll come. But, Your Grace, understand, if this goes wrong, if our people die for your political struggle, Thornhold will remember. We'll survive whatever comes, and we'll remember who asked us to bleed. I understand. Do you? Because from where I sit, you're a noble using desperate people as shields. That's not leadership. That's exploitation. The words hit hard because they were true. Elara didn't deflect. You're right. I am using you, but I'm also the only person in this duchy trying to feed you. Those things exist simultaneously. I can't make that contradiction disappear. Miriam stood. At least you're honest about it. We'll arrive in 3 days with our militia. I hope you know what you're doing. I don't, but I'm doing it anyway. The Thornhold delegation left, and Elara felt the weight of their trust, fragile and conditional, settle on her shoulders like physical pressure. Elder Thomas from Silverstream arrived last, a broad man with a prosthetic leg from the border wars. He limped into the library and immediately said, "No." Elara blinked. "No? I heard what you asked the others. The answer is no. Silverstream won't fight in a noble's marriage war." "This isn't about marriage." "It's always about marriage when nobles fight. Power, succession, who controls what. My people don't care. We care about grain and survival. You want to give us relief funds? Fine, send them. But we're not dying so you can keep your title." "If I lose my title, you get no relief funds at all. Then we find other ways to survive. We've done it before." Thomas's voice was hard as frozen ground. "You think you're special because you invoked old laws and gave good speeches? You're still a noble asking villagers to bleed. The answer is no." Elara had prepared arguments, persuasions, appeals to shared interest. None of them felt adequate against Thomas's flat refusal. "What would change your mind?" she asked quietly. "Nothing. There's no world where Silverstream fights for duchy politics." Thomas headed for the door, then stopped. "But I'll tell you something for free, Your Grace. The other villages might come because they're desperate. But desperation makes bad soldiers. When those southern troops arrive and people start dying, your borrowed army will break. Then what?" "Then I lose. And we all starve together. Great plan." He left without another word. Elara sat alone in the library, Thomas's words echoing. He was right. Desperation made bad soldiers. Garrett and Miriam's militias would come because they had no alternative, but that didn't make them reliable. The first real violence might scatter them completely. She was building a house of cards against a winter storm. But what else could she do? Surrender? Let Alistair win? Watch everything her family built dissolve into Southern-style corruption? The library door opened. Margot slipped in, face pale. "Your Grace, Commander Varanus needs to see you. Now. He says it's urgent." Elara found the commander in the stables, neutral ground, away from the main buildings. He was checking a horse's shoes with the careful attention of a man buying time to think. "You've decided," Elara said. "The southern reinforcements arrive in 2 days. Riders confirmed it this morning. 100 soldiers, fully equipped, under command of Lord Herrick, the Duke's cousin." "I know Lord Herrick. He's brutal and loyal. He's also smart. He won't attack blindly. He'll wait, assess, find your weaknesses." Vorenus set down the horse's hoof. "My men voted. 43 will stand with you under the winter protocols. The rest won't fight their fellow soldiers, no matter the cause. 43 is better than none." "It's nowhere near enough. Herrick will have 100 trained, paid, well-armed troops. You'll have 43 conflicted guards and maybe 70 desperate villagers. That's not an army, Your Grace. It's a massacre waiting to happen." "Then what do you suggest?" Vorenus pulled a folded map from his jacket. "The southern troops have to enter through Widow's Pass, only route that's cleared this time of year. It's narrow, defensible, and if we position correctly, we can make entry costly enough that Herrick reconsiders direct assault. You want to ambush them?" "I want to create a standoff. Make it clear that taking the capital requires casualties Herrick might not want to accept. Buy time for negotiation. Alistair won't negotiate. He wants me removed. Then we hold the pass until spring thaw and hope political pressure changes the situation." Vorenus's voice was steady, but his eyes showed doubt. "It's a long shot, Your Grace. Holding defensive positions for months in winter. We'd need supplies, rotation schedules, constant vigilance. One mistake and we're overrun." Elara studied the map. Widow's Pass was indeed narrow, 50 feet wide at its tightest point, steep rock walls on both sides. A good position for defense, terrible for retreat. If we commit forces to the pass and Alistair moves against us here in the capital, we're split and vulnerable. Yes. And if we hold here and let Herrick's troops enter unopposed, we're facing superior numbers in open engagement. Also yes. Those are both losing scenarios. Welcome to military reality. Vorenus traced the pass on the map. There's no clean victory here, Your Grace. Only different ways to lose. I'm offering the one that keeps your people alive longest. Elara stared at the map, her mind racing through possibilities. Both options were terrible. Splitting forces created vulnerability. Concentrating them created limited options. And underlying everything was the simple truth that she was trying to win a military confrontation with borrowed soldiers who'd break under real pressure. There's a third option, she said slowly, which is, we don't fight at the pass, we don't fight here, we make fighting irrelevant. Vorenus frowned. I don't follow. Herrick's coming to enforce the Duke's authority and remove me from power. That requires public legitimacy, the appearance of restoring order, not just military conquest. What if we remove that legitimacy before he arrives? How? By making my removal so obviously unjust that even Alistair's supporters can't defend it. By forcing the court to choose sides publicly before soldiers make the choice for them. The commander's eyes narrowed. You want to hold another assembly, force a public declaration. More than that, I want to present evidence of corruption so comprehensive that supporting Alistair becomes political suicide. Documents, witnesses, testimonies from the village elders about stolen relief funds. Make it so clear, so undeniable, that even Lord Herrick has to question his orders. That's gambling everything on politics. Better than gambling on military force we don't have. Vorenus was quiet, thinking. Finally, he nodded slowly. It might work. If the presentation is strong enough, if the evidence is damning enough, it creates doubt. Soldiers follow orders, but they're less enthusiastic when those orders look like supporting theft. Exactly. But you'd need everyone there. The full court, all the governors, the village elders, neutral witnesses. And you'd need to do it before Herrick arrives. Once soldiers are here, it's too late. Tomorrow, Elara said. We hold the assembly tomorrow. Give everyone 24 hours notice, present everything publicly, force declarations of support, create a record of who stands where. That's fast. People will complain about inadequate notice. Good. Let them complain publicly, on record, about not having time to prepare defenses of theft. Elara felt strategy crystallizing. Send writers to every governor, every council member, every person of influence. Tell them the Duchess is invoking emergency assembly under the winter protocols. Attendance is mandatory. The Duke will try to stop it. Let him try. Every obstruction becomes more evidence of guilt. Vorenus smiled grimly. You're learning. Your mother used to say the best defense is making your opponent defend themselves. Did she win those fights? Usually, but not always. The commander moved toward the stable door. I'll send the riders. But your grace, understand, if this doesn't work, if the court doesn't turn, we'll be facing Herrick's troops with even less support. You're burning bridges. The bridges were already burning. I'm just controlling the fire. He left, and Elara stood alone in the stable, surrounded by horses that stamped and breathed in the cold. Her plan was desperate, built on assumptions about human nature and political calculation that might be completely wrong. But desperation was all she had. She spent the rest of the day preparing with Halford and Governor Thorne, organizing evidence into presentations that even the least attentive observer couldn't ignore. Treasury documents showing systematic theft, letters from village elders describing hunger, inventory reports proving relief funds had been redirected. The Northmarch necklace itself, sitting in its velvet box like an accusation. This is strong, Thorne said, reviewing the materials. But your grace, you're assuming people care about evidence. Sometimes they just care about power. Then we make caring about evidence the path to power. Show them that supporting Alistair means defending child starvation. Make corruption politically toxic. In theory. In practice, people are good at justifying what benefits them, not when justification requires public declarations. Private corruption is easy. Public defense of it is different. Thorne nodded slowly. You're weaponizing shame. I'm weaponizing truth. Shame is just a side effect. That night, Elara couldn't sleep. She paced her chambers, reviewing arguments, anticipating objections, preparing for every possible challenge. Tomorrow would decide everything. Either the court would turn against Alistair's corruption, or they'd accept it and she'd face Herrick's soldiers with nothing but 43 conflicted guards and a handful of starving villagers. Near midnight, someone knocked softly. Margot opened the door to reveal Seline, alone and wrapped in a dark cloak. We need to talk, the younger woman said. Elara's hand moved toward the knife she'd started keeping on her desk. If you're here to threaten me, I'm here to negotiate. Seline stepped inside without invitation. Up close, without careful makeup and perfect lighting, she looked tired. You're holding an assembly tomorrow. Public accusations, evidence presentation, forcing political declarations. Your intelligence is good. Alistair is planning to arrest you before the assembly happens. Tonight, probably within the hour. Commander Varenus and your documents won't matter if you're in chains. Elara's blood went cold. Why are you telling me this? Seline moved to the window, her reflection ghostly in dark glass. Because I'm not an idiot. I've watched you maneuver for 3 days. The winter protocols, the village militias, the evidence gathering. It's impressive. And I've watched Alistair respond with threats and violence and increasingly desperate measures. Your point? My point is I backed the wrong horse. Seline turned and her expression was calculating rather than emotional. I came north for opportunity. Alistair seemed like that opportunity. Powerful, ambitious, willing to reward loyalty, but he's not powerful. He's weak and petulant. He can't even outmaneuver his own wife. So this is self-preservation. Everything is self-preservation. You know that. Seline pulled an envelope from her cloak. This is a letter from Alistair to Lord Herrick, outlining plans for tomorrow. Arrest you during the night, claim you attempted to flee justice. Use that as justification for immediate removal. Herrick's troops arrived to find everything already resolved. The Duchess gone, order restored, no need for public assemblies or evidence presentations. Elara took the letter and scanned it. The handwriting was Alistair's. The seal was genuine. The content was exactly what Seline described, plus worse. Plans to exile Elara to a southern convent, confiscate her family's holdings, erase her from duchy records. This is treason, Elara said quietly. This is politics. But yes, technically treason. Seline moved closer. I'm giving you advance warning and documentary evidence. In exchange, I want immunity. When this ends, however it ends, I want safe passage south and enough funds to start over. You're bargaining for your escape. I'm bargaining for my survival. There's a difference. Seline's voice hardened. I don't care about you or Alistair or the duchy. I care about not being destroyed when this whole thing collapses. And it is collapsing, Your Grace. The only question is who gets buried in the rubble. Elara studied the woman who'd been her replacement, her enemy, her husband's mistress, saw past the beauty and charm to the calculating survivor beneath. Seline wasn't evil, she was practical. Ruthlessly, recognizably practical. If I grant immunity, you testify tomorrow, publicly, about everything, the affair, the redirected funds, Alistair's plans, full disclosure. I'd be ruined. You're already ruined. This way you're ruined with protection and money instead of ruined and vulnerable. Seline's jaw tightened. Fine, I testify. You guarantee safe passage and 10,000 crowns. 5,000. 8. 6, and I don't investigate where you got the jewelry you're currently wearing. A ghost of a smile crossed Seline's face. You're better at this than I expected. I'm Northern. We negotiate survival, not comfort. Elara extended her hand. Agreement? Seline shook it. Agreement. But Your Grace? Move fast. Alistair's guards will come for you within the hour. Whatever you're planning, do it now. She left as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving Elara holding a letter that proved her husband planned to imprison her tonight. Within the hour. Elara grabbed her cloak and ran. She found Commander Varenus in the guard barracks, quietly briefing his loyal soldiers. When she burst in, every head turned. We move now, she said, breathless. Alistair's coming to arrest me tonight. We don't have until tomorrow. Varenus cursed. How do you know? Seline told me. She's switching sides and brought documentation. Elara handed him the letter. We hold the assembly tonight. Now, wake everyone, force attendance, present everything before he can stop it. Your Grace, it's past midnight. I don't care. Ring the emergency bells. Invoke the Winter Protocol's crisis provisions. Get every governor, every council member, every person of importance into the Great Hall within the hour. If they refuse, note their refusal publicly. This is chaos. This is survival. Either we seize initiative or we lose it forever. Varenus read the letter, his face darkening. Then he nodded sharply. I'll ring the bells, but Your Grace, the Duke will respond. His guards will try to stop this. Let them try in front of witnesses. Elara turned to the assembled soldiers. How many of you will stand with me? Physically, publicly, against whatever the Duke orders? 43 hands rose without hesitation. Then stand ready. This ends tonight. The emergency bells began tolling, their bronze voices echoing across the frozen duchy. Ancient, unmistakable, impossible to ignore. People stumbled from beds, dressed in confusion, converged on the great hall demanding explanations. Elara stood at the entrance with her 43 loyal guards, Halford beside her with documentation, Governor Thorne, and the village elders forming a wall of civilian authority. Alistair arrived with his own guards, still partially dressed, rage written across his face. "What is this?" "Emergency assembly," Elara said calmly. "Evidence of treason requires immediate presentation." "You can't." "I can. I am. The court is gathering. We'll present everything publicly. Now. Tonight. Unless you'd like to prevent testimony through force, in which case please proceed. I'm sure everyone would love to see the Duke silencing witnesses." Alistair looked at the guards, the civilians, the growing crowd, saw the trap she'd built. He could stop her through violence, but that would confirm every accusation. Or he could let the assembly proceed and face evidence he couldn't refute. His hand moved toward his sword. Elara didn't flinch. For 3 terrible seconds, the entire world balanced on the edge of violence. Then Seline stepped forward from the crowd, still wearing her cloak, the North March necklace glittering at her throat. "I have testimony," she said clearly, "about theft, corruption, and planned imprisonment. I invoke witness protection under the winter protocols." The crowd gasped. Alistair's face went white with shock and fury, and Elara knew she'd won, or at least survived long enough to fight one more round. The assembly doors opened, the court filed in, and the final confrontation began. The great hall filled with bodies and confusion, people still tying cloaks and demanding explanations. Torches blazed in their sconces, throwing shadows that made the ancient stone walls look like they were moving. Elara stood at the high table with her documentation spread before her like weapons, while Alistair positioned himself near the far entrance with his personal guards, men whose loyalty had been purchased, not earned. The crowd sorted itself instinctively. Governors and military commanders near the front, close enough to see evidence. Merchants and minor nobles in the middle, waiting to see which way power shifted. Servants and functionaries pressed against the back walls, witnesses to history they'd never expected to see. Seline stood alone near the center, the North March necklace catching torchlight, looking simultaneously defiant and terrified. She'd just betrayed the Duke publicly, in front of everyone who mattered. There was no walking that back. Lord Chancellor Wickham tried to restore order, his voice cracking as he called for silence. "This assembly, this unprecedented, irregular assembly, is fully legal under Winter Protocol emergency provisions," Elara cut in. Section 7, paragraph 3. "The Duchess may convene immediate assembly when evidence of crisis-level governance failure emerges. I invoke that authority now." "It's past midnight." "Crisis doesn't keep office hours, Chancellor," Elara's voice carried across the hall, sharp and clear. "I have evidence of systematic theft, resource misallocation, and planned imprisonment without trial. Would you prefer I wait until morning to present treason, or shall we address it while the traitor is still present?" The word traitor landed like a physical blow. Alistair stepped forward, hand on sword hilt. "How dare you?" "Sit down," Governor Thorne said, rising from his seat. "Let her present. If the evidence is false, you'll have opportunity to refute it. But right now, Your Grace, you're armed and threatening your wife in front of the entire court. That's not the look of innocence." Alistair's guard shifted, hands moving to weapons. Varenus's loyal soldiers stepped forward to match them. The hall held its breath, balanced on the edge of violence that would solve nothing and destroy everything. Elder Garrett stood slowly from his position among the observers. "I came from Greymarch to hear about relief funds. Are we fighting or talking? Because my people are starving while nobles threaten each other." The blunt practicality cut through tension like ice through rope. Several people laughed nervously. Alistair's hand moved away from his sword, and Varenus's soldiers stepped back. The moment of immediate violence passed, leaving only political warfare. "Present your evidence, Your Grace," Wickham said, sounding exhausted. "Let's finish this." Elara gestured to Halford, who stepped forward with his careful ledgers and documentation. The Master of Records wasn't a performer. He was methodical and precise, which made his testimony more devastating than any theatrical accusation could have been. Treasury records for the past 18 months, Halford began, opening the first ledger. Allocated relief funds, 240,000 crowns, designated for border village support during winter months. Actual disbursement to villages, 83,000 crowns. Variance, 157,000 crowns. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. That was enough money to feed half the duchy for a year. "Where did the variance go?" someone called out. Halford turned pages with the calm of a man who'd triple-checked every figure. Southern trade delegations, 42,000 crowns. Luxury goods purchases, 38,000 crowns. Private entertainment expenses, 27,000 crowns. Estate improvements unrelated to duchy function, 19,000 crowns. The remainder dispersed through various expenditures, all personally authorized by the Duke. He produced authorization forms, each bearing Alistair's signature and seal, passed them forward so the governors could examine them directly. No one spoke as the document circulated, only the rustle of paper and sharp intakes of breath as people recognized legitimate seals on indefensible spending. "These could be forgeries," one of Alistair's supporters said weakly. "They're not," Lord Pemberton said, studying one closely. "I recognize the Duke's handwriting. I've reviewed enough of his correspondence to know." Halford continued relentlessly. Additionally, grain inventories show systematic shortfalls in border regions. Greymarch requested emergency supplies 6 weeks ago. Request denied. Thornhold reported critical shortages in medical supplies. Request acknowledged but unfulfilled. Silverstream documented infrastructure failures requiring immediate repair. No response from ducal authority. Elder Miriam stood, her face hard. "We sent 3 separate requests. Detailed documented requests with witness signatures. We were told the duchy had competing priorities." "What priorities?" Lady Ashford asked sharply. "What was more important than preventing starvation?" Silence. Alistair stood rigid, his face an unreadable mask, but Elara could see calculation happening behind his eyes. He was measuring responses, counting supporters, determining whether he could still control the narrative. "Those expenditures were investments," he said finally. "Building relationships with southern trade partners, modernizing infrastructure, positioning the duchy for long-term prosperity. You're all thinking too small, too focused on immediate needs. Immediate needs like eating," Elder Garrett interrupted. "My grandson is 8 years old and weighs less than he should because we've been rationing food for months. But please, tell me more about long-term prosperity." "The southern trade agreements will bring unprecedented wealth." "When?" Governor Thorne cut in. "Next year? 5 years? How many children starve while we wait for theoretical wealth?" "You don't understand economics." "I understand that people are dying now." Thorne's voice was cold. "And I understand that you spent relief money on jewelry for your mistress." All eyes turned to Seline, who stood very still, the North March necklace suddenly looking less like adornment and more like evidence. Alistair's face flushed. "That was a gesture of appreciation for diplomatic work." 40,000 crowns worth of appreciation, Elara said quietly. "While Greymarch's children ate once a day, while Thornhold's elderly died from treatable illnesses because medicine was too expensive, while Silverstream's mill collapsed and couldn't be repaired." She let that sit, watching it sink into the crowd's consciousness. Numbers were abstract. Dead children and collapsed mills were real. "Lady Seline," Elara continued, turning to the younger woman, "you invoked witness protection. What testimony do you offer?" Celine's hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "I was recruited to the duchy 8 months ago by the Duke's southern relatives. They told me I'd be compensated for establishing relationships that would facilitate trade agreements. I understood that to mean romantic involvement with the Duke, which I accepted." The admission caused gasps, but Seline continued without flinching. "I was paid directly from duchy funds, specifically from accounts designated for provincial administration. The payments were disguised as consulting fees, but they were personal compensation. 15,000 crowns over 8 months. "You're lying," Alistair said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I have letters, contracts, payment records." Celine's voice hardened. "I kept everything, Your Grace, because I'm not stupid. I knew eventually someone would question the arrangement and I wanted protection. The Duchess offered that protection in exchange for testimony, so here it is." She pulled documents from inside her cloak, carefully preserved correspondence between herself and Alistair's southern relatives, outlining the arrangement in explicit detail. Passed them to Wickham, who read them with increasing horror. "These are genuine," the Chancellor said faintly. "The seals, the signatures. This is conspiracy to defraud Duchy resources." "It's more than that," Seline said. 3 weeks ago, the Duke showed me the letter he planned to send Lord Herrick. He was bringing Southern soldiers not to restore order, but to forcibly remove the Duchess and install direct control. He told me once she was gone, we'd reorganize the Duchy's governance structure to eliminate the winter protocols and traditional oversight, complete centralization under ducal authority. The hall erupted. Voices overlapped, some shouting questions, others making accusations. Alistair tried to speak but couldn't make himself heard over the chaos. His supporters were backing away, physically distancing themselves from association. Elara let the chaos build for a moment, then raised her hand. The gesture was small, but the hall quieted. People wanted to hear what came next. "The winter protocols exist for exactly this situation," she said. "When ducal authority prioritizes personal gain over collective survival, emergency powers shift to the Duchess. Not as punishment, but as correction. Our ancestors understood that frontier survival requires distributed authority, that no single person can be trusted with absolute control when winter makes mistakes lethal." She gestured to the village elders. "Elder Garrett, Elder Miriam, Elder Thomas, you represent communities the Duchy forgot. Under the winter protocols, I'm establishing a civilian oversight council. You'll have direct authority over relief fund allocation, with monthly public accounting. No more requests disappearing, no more competing priorities that somehow always favor luxury over survival." Garrett looked stunned. "You're giving us actual power? I'm giving you voice in decisions that affect your survival. That's not generosity, it's basic governance. You shouldn't have to beg for food while nobles buy jewelry." Miriam stood slowly. "And when spring comes, when the crisis passes and the protocols end, does this council disappear?" "No." Elara met her eyes. "I'm proposing permanent reform. The winter protocols proved necessary because we drifted from accountability. That doesn't fix itself. We formalize civilian representation, make it part of Duchy structure, ensure this doesn't happen again." "You're restructuring governance," Lord Pemberton said, but he sounded thoughtful rather than accusatory, creating a new power balance. "I'm restoring an old one. The Northern Territories survived because communities governed themselves locally, with Duchy coordination rather than control. We forgot that. I'm proposing we remember." Commander Vorenus stepped forward. "And the military? Where do we fit in this new structure?" "Exactly where you've always fit, protecting the Duchy, not individual rulers. I want to formalize military independence. Soldiers swear to territory and people, not to whoever holds the ducal title. That prevents this," she gestured at Alistair's guards, "personal armies enforcing personal agendas." "That's sedition," Wickham said, but weakly. "You're dismantling ducal authority." "I'm limiting it. There's a difference." Elara looked around the hall, seeing calculation on every face. "The question before this assembly is simple. Do we continue with concentrated power that enables this kind of corruption, or do we distribute authority in ways that prevent it? Do we trust one person's judgment, or build systems that don't require trust?" "Systems require agreement," Lady Ashford said. "They require cooperation from people who benefit from current arrangements. Why would anyone with power vote to reduce it? Because the alternative is worse." Elara pulled out the letter Seline had provided, Alistair's correspondence with Lord Herrick. "The Duke planned to arrest me tonight, claim I fled justice, use that as justification for military occupation. Lord Herrick's southern soldiers arrive tomorrow. They're not coming to protect the Duchy. They're coming to enforce the Duke's authority against civilian resistance." She let that sink in. "So here's what you're choosing. Accept reforms that distribute power and create oversight, or face military occupation by soldiers who don't care about border villages or local governance. Those are your options. Choose." The silence that followed felt thick enough to touch. People looked at each other, having whispered conferences, calculating political futures. Alistair finally found his voice. "You're presenting this as choice, but it's extortion. Accept your power grab, or face military consequences I supposedly planned, based on a letter from my mistress, who just admitted being paid to betray me." The letter is genuine, Wickham said quietly. I recognize your seal, Your Grace. Your handwriting. The paper from your personal stock. Then it was stolen. By whom? Who had access to your private correspondence, your personal seal, your letterhead? Who would forge such a specific, detailed document that perfectly matches your demonstrated priorities? Wickham set down the letter. Your Grace, I've served this duchy for 30 years. I've watched you centralize authority, redirect resources, dismiss civilian concerns. This letter isn't aberration, it's confirmation. The Chancellor's defection broke something. Alistair's remaining supporters began shifting, reweighting loyalties against new realities. A duke without his Chancellor's backing was a duke without legitimacy. Governor Thorne stood. I support the Duchess's reforms, civilian oversight council, military independence, permanent structural changes. The Winter Protocols work because they acknowledge human fallibility. Let's build that acknowledgement into normal governance. Seconded, Lord Pemberton said. Thirded, Lady Ashford added. One by one, the court declared support. Not unanimous. Several nobles abstained, unwilling to commit either way, but overwhelming. The power structure was shifting visibly, authority flowing away from the Duke's position toward distributed governance. Alistair watched it happen with something like disbelief. You're all making a mistake. When Herrick arrives with his soldiers, he'll find unified opposition, Vorenus interrupted. My soldiers will stand with the civilian council. We've discussed it. 43 guardsmen, plus village militias, plus whatever provincial forces the governors command. Herrick can try to occupy the duchy, but it won't be clean or quick. And it won't be legal, Wickham added. If the court formally ratifies the Duchess's emergency powers and the reforms she's proposing, then Lord Herrick's military action becomes foreign invasion, not internal peacekeeping. That's a very different political problem. Elara saw the trap close around Alistair. She'd built it carefully. Evidence to destroy credibility, reforms to redistribute power, legal frameworks to delegitimize military response. Each piece alone was vulnerable, but together they created a structure that was remarkably difficult to dismantle. I want to vote, she said clearly. Formal ratification of Winter Protocol emergency powers, establishment of Civilian Oversight Council, military independence reforms, an investigation into ducal resource misallocation. Those who support, stand. Thorne stood immediately. Then Pemberton, Ashford, Wickham. The village elders rose together. Vorenus and his soldiers. One by one, the hall's occupants stood until only Alistair's small cluster of guards remained seated, and even some of them looked uncertain. Recorded, Halford said, writing frantically. Ratification approved by overwhelming majority. The Duchess's emergency powers are confirmed, proposed reforms are accepted for implementation, investigation is authorized. Alistair stood alone, physically and politically, surrounded by a court that had chosen his wife over his authority. Elara almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But sympathy was a luxury neither of them could afford. You've ruined everything, Alistair said, voice hollow. The Southern agreements, the trade relationships, the modernization plans, all gone because you're too afraid to change. No, Elara said quietly. We're changing, just not in the direction you wanted. The Northern Territories don't need to become Southern. We need to be more ourselves, distributed, resilient, accountable. You wanted transformation that denied our nature. I'm proposing evolution that honors it. Philosophical nonsense. Practical survival. She turned to Vorenus. Commander, the Duke is confined to his quarters pending investigation. He's not arrested, but he's not free to leave the capital or communicate with outside forces. Can your men ensure that? They can, Your Grace. Then make it so, gently, respectfully, but firmly. She looked at Alistair. You'll be treated with the dignity your position deserves, but you won't interfere with governance or contact Lord Herrick. Those are the terms. Alistair's guards moved to intervene, but Vorenus's soldiers outnumbered them, and the court's body language made clear whose orders held legitimacy. After a moment of tense standoff, Alistair's men stepped back. This isn't over, Alistair said. No, Elara agreed, but it's different now, and different might be enough. Vorenus escorted Alistair from the hall, leaving Elara standing before a court that had just fundamentally restructured duchy governance in the middle of the night. Lady Ashford approached quietly. Your Grace, That was extraordinary. But you understand what you've done? You've essentially created a new government in one assembly. There will be resistance, confusion, implementation problems. I know. We'll work through them. Elara felt exhaustion settling into her bones. But at least we'll work through them together, rather than watching people starve while nobles argue about trade agreements. The village elders don't trust you, Ashford continued. They supported reforms because the alternative was worse, not because they believe in your leadership. You'll need to prove yourself repeatedly. Good. Leaders should have to prove themselves. That's the whole point. The assembly dispersed slowly, people clustering in groups to process what had happened. Elara watched them go, seeing the birth of something new and uncertain. She'd gambled everything on the idea that people would choose accountability over authority, and somehow, barely, it had worked. Elder Garrett approached, his weathered face thoughtful. Your Grace, about this oversight council, you're skeptical. I'm practical. You've given us theoretical power, but implementation matters. If this council is just theater that rubber stamps duchy decisions, it's worthless. Agreed. Which is why the council will control the relief fund treasury directly, not request funds, control them. You'll have financial independence. Garrett's eyebrows rose. That's actual authority. That's the point. I can't promise perfection, Elder. I can't promise we won't make mistakes or face new problems, but I can promise you'll have voice in decisions and resources to act on that voice. The rest we figure out together. Together, Garrett tested the word. Northern nobles don't usually say together to village elders. Northern nobles have been making mistakes for too long. Time to try something different. He nodded slowly, then extended his hand. Greymarch will hold you to this, Your Grace. We'll participate in good faith, but if it becomes empty rhetoric, you'll know. I'd expect nothing less. She shook his hand, feeling calluses from a lifetime of manual labor. How soon can you get relief supplies moving? If funds are actually available. 3 days. We have lists, transportation routes, everything ready. We just needed authorization and money. Halford will transfer funds tomorrow. Coordinate with him directly. No ducal intermediaries, no approval processes. Just get your people fed. Garrett's eyes shone briefly. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me. I'm fixing a problem I should have caught months ago, but I appreciate the grace. He left with Miriam and the other elders, already planning logistics. Elara watched them work with quiet satisfaction. This was governance, not grand speeches or ceremonial authority, but practical people solving concrete problems. Seline approached hesitantly. Your Grace, about our agreement. 6,000 crowns and safe passage south. Halford will arrange it. Elara looked at the younger woman. Why did you really switch sides? Self-preservation is part of it, but there's more. Seline was quiet for a moment. I grew up in a minor house. No power, no influence, just beauty and charm to leverage. I thought that was enough, that if I was beautiful and clever, I'd be safe. But watching you these past days, I realized something. What? Beauty fades. Charm is circumstantial. Power built on appearance collapses the moment appearance changes. But competence? Actually knowing how things work and making them function? That's durable. Seline touched the North March necklace. I wore this thinking it meant I'd won, but you were right. It was just expensive stones. It didn't make me necessary. It made me decorative. So this is career advice? This is me acknowledging that I chose badly. I could have tried to learn governance, to become actually useful instead of ornamental. Instead, I took the easy path. Now I'm paying for it. Elara studied her. You're smarter than you pretend. I'm smart enough to know when I've lost. Seline smiled faintly. 6,000 crowns and safe passage. I'll take it and start over somewhere people don't know me as the mistress who betrayed a duke. What will you do? Something practical. Maybe manage a trading house. I'm good with numbers and people. Maybe marry someone competent and actually support them instead of using them. I haven't decided. She paused. For what it's worth, I hope your reforms work. I hope the North figures out how to be itself instead of trying to copy the South. You deserve that. Thanks. Elara meant it. Seline left, and Elara was alone in the great hall with Halford, who was organizing documents into careful stacks. That was unprecedented, Your Grace, the Master of Records said quietly. Which part? All of it. Midnight assembly, public testimony, governmental restructuring, ducal confinement. I've been keeping records for 20 years and never seen anything like it. Good or bad unprecedented? Necessary unprecedented. Halford looked up. Your mother would be proud. She always said the winter protocols existed for exactly this kind of situation, but she never had to use them like this. You did what she couldn't. She had a better husband. She did. But you have a better court now. They chose accountability over authority tonight. That's significant. Elara looked around the empty hall, seeing morning light starting to gray the windows. The night had felt endless, but dawn was coming. What happens when Herrick arrives? She asked. We present him with the Assembly's decision and dare him to override civilian governance with military force. That's politically toxic, even for Southern lords. He might try, but it'll cost him support. And if he doesn't care about support, then Commander Varenus's defensive positions at Widow's Pass become relevant. But I don't think it'll come to that. Herrick's ambitious, not suicidal. Occupying a united opposition is different than restoring a friendly duke. Elara hoped he was right. But hope wasn't strategy. The next 24 hours passed in organized chaos. Halford transferred funds to the Village Oversight Council, who immediately dispatched supply caravans. Governor Thorne formally announced the investigation into ducal finances. Lady Ashford began organizing the Civilian Council's operational structure. Commander Varenus rotated soldiers to Widow's Pass while maintaining capital security. Alistair remained confined to his quarters, reportedly sullen but not violent. Wickham visited him twice to discuss legal procedures, emerging both times shaking his head at the Duke's refusal to acknowledge reality. And Elara barely slept, managing a dozen simultaneous crises as the new governance structure lurched into existence. She'd created the framework in one dramatic assembly, but implementation required constant attention, compromise, and crisis management. Late the second afternoon, a rider arrived from the southern border. Elara met him in the courtyard, surrounded by advisors and guards. The rider dismounted stiffly, clearly exhausted from hard travel. Your Grace, I bring message from Lord Herrick's column. What message? They've stopped at Widow's Pass. Lord Herrick requests parley before proceeding. He's asking for clarification of duchy governance status before committing troops to action. Relief flooded through Elara, but she kept her face neutral. When? Tomorrow at noon, neutral ground at the pass entrance. He guarantees safe conduct for you and 3 advisors. Tell him I accept. Myself, Commander Varenus, Governor Thorne, and Chancellor Wickham will attend. The rider nodded and departed. Elara turned to find her advisors looking cautiously optimistic. He's negotiating, Thorne said. That means he's uncertain about using force. Or he's gathering intelligence before attacking, Varenus countered. Either way, we talk first. That's progress. Elara looked toward the southern road, invisible beyond walls and snow. Prepare for parley. Full documentation of the Assembly's decisions, legal justifications, evidence of popular support. We make it clear that military action means occupying hostile territory, not restoring friendly authority. They dispersed to prepare, leaving Elara alone in the courtyard. Snow was falling again, but lighter now, just a dusting rather than the heavy storms of previous days. Winter was still present, still dangerous, but perhaps marginally less aggressive. She thought about the past week. Her birthday banquet turned confrontation, the midnight assembly, the governmental restructuring. Everything had changed so fast it barely felt real. But the village supply caravans were real. The Oversight Council's treasury access was real. The court's support for reform was real. She'd gambled everything on the idea that people wanted accountability more than they wanted tradition, and somehow it had worked. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Margot found her standing in the snow. Your Grace, you should rest before tomorrow. I should do a lot of things, but you'll do this one because you need to be sharp for the parley. Margot's voice was firm. Lord Herrick will test you. You need rest. Elara allowed herself to be led inside, to her chambers, to the bed she'd barely used in days. She slept deeply and dreamlessly, exhausted beyond the point where worry could keep her awake. When she woke the next morning, Margot had laid out traveling clothes, practical wool and leather, nothing ceremonial. Armor disguised as winter gear. The village supply caravans reported in, Margot said as Elara dressed. Grey March received grain and medical supplies. Thornhold got infrastructure materials. They're already distributing to families. Anyone refusing to participate? Claiming it's illegitimate? No one. People are too hungry to care about political legitimacy. They're just grateful to eat. Elara smiled faintly. Practical survival over theoretical authority. The Northern way. She met Varanus, Thorn, and Wickham at the main gate. They rode south through snow-covered landscape, 4 people carrying the duchy's entire political future toward parley with an army. Widow's Pass appeared at midday, narrow walls of stone creating a natural choke point between territories. Lord Herrick's camp was visible in the distance, organized and professional. 100 soldiers, fully equipped, representing power Elara couldn't match militarily. But Herrick had stopped, had requested parley. That meant doubt. They met in the center of the pass, both parties dismounting to stand on neutral ground. Herrick was Alistair's age, with the same aristocratic features but harder eyes, a man who'd seen real conflict. "Duchess," he said, nodding respectfully, "an unusual situation." "Lord Herrick, welcome to the Northern Territories, though I imagine welcome is complicated under current circumstances." "Extremely complicated," Herrick gestured to his advisors. "I was sent to restore order and support the Duke, but I'm hearing reports of midnight assemblies, governmental restructuring, and popular support for revolutionary changes. Which version is true?" "Both," Elara said. "There was chaos. We restructured governance to address it. The court ratified changes with overwhelming support. Now we're implementing reforms while managing transition. That's the situation you'd be entering." She handed him documentation, assembly transcripts, voting records, evidence of civilian support. Herrick read carefully, his expression unreadable. "This is sedition dressed as protocol," he said finally. "This is crisis response using legal frameworks," Wickham countered. "The winter protocols explicitly authorize ducal power transfer during resource emergencies. Everything here follows established law." "Established law you're interpreting creatively. Established law we're applying literally." Thorn stepped forward. "Lord Herrick, I'll speak plainly. The Duke systematically stole relief funds while border villages starved. The Duchess stopped it using legal emergency powers. The court supported her because the evidence was overwhelming. You can call that sedition if you want, but it's also just competent governance replacing corruption." Herrick looked at Varanus. "And the military stands with this?" "The military stands with the territory and people," Varanus said carefully, "as our oaths require. If you advance with intent to reinstall the Duke by force, you'll face opposition, not because we're rebels, but because we're following proper chain of command under emergency protocols." "That's a very convenient interpretation." "It's the accurate one. I have soldiers sworn to protect the duchy, not individual rulers. They'll fulfill that oath." Herrick paced, thinking. Finally, he turned back to Elara. "What happens to the Duke?" "Investigation into financial misconduct. If evidence warrants, formal charges. If not, he remains Duke with reduced authority under reform governance structure. Either way, the systematic theft stops." "You're neutering ducal authority." "I'm adding accountability. There's a difference." "A fine one. The only one available." Elara met his eyes. "Lord Herrick, you came here to restore order. I'm offering you order, just not the kind you expected. Functional governance, civilian support, legal justification. You can fight that, spend soldiers and political capital occupying hostile territory, or you can accept it and return south, having avoided pointless conflict. Which serves your interests better?" The question hung in frozen air. Herrick studied her face, clearly measuring sincerity against manipulation. "If I withdraw," he said slowly, "it looks like I back down from civilian resistance. That's politically costly. If you withdraw because the situation has been resolved through legitimate governance processes, it looks like you chose law over force. That's politically advantageous." Elara kept her voice steady. "I'm offering you an exit that preserves your reputation while acknowledging that military occupation of supportive territory serves no one." Herrick looked at his advisors, having quick, quiet consultation. Finally, he nodded. "I'll withdraw." "But the Duke's southern relatives will contest this. They'll argue the assembly was coerced, the protocols misapplied, the whole situation illegitimate. Let them argue in courts and councils, not battlefields. We'll defend our decisions legally, not militarily. Isn't that better?" "Better for whom?" "Everyone who'd die in pointless fighting." Elara extended her hand. We don't have to be enemies, Lord Herrick. We can be regions with different governance styles who nonetheless respect each other's sovereignty. The North doesn't need Southern control. The South doesn't need Northern resistance. We can simply be separate and functional. Herrick shook her hand slowly. You're more practical than I expected. I'm Northern. We prioritize survival over pride. He smiled faintly. I'll report that the situation has been internally resolved through legitimate protocols. My soldiers will withdraw, but Duchess, if this falls apart, if your reforms collapse into chaos, I'll be back, with more soldiers and less patience. Understood. We'll make sure it doesn't come to that. Herrick and his delegation returned to their camp. Within hours, the Southern soldiers began withdrawing, marching back the way they'd come. Elara watched them go, feeling tension drain from her shoulders. We won, Varanus said quietly. We survived, Elara corrected. Winning comes later, after we prove the reforms actually work. They rode back to the capital in silence, each processing what had just happened. Political restructuring through midnight assembly. Military standoff resolved through negotiation. Power shifting from individual authority to distributed governance. The Northern territories had just fundamentally changed, and no one was quite sure if the change would hold. But for now, for this moment, it was enough that they'd tried. The capital felt different when they returned, quieter somehow, despite the same number of people moving through the same stone corridors. Elara realized it wasn't the place that had changed, but the silence. No more whispered plots, no more watching eyes calculating her downfall. Just exhausted people trying to figure out how to make unprecedented reforms actually work. She went straight to the Treasury building, where Halford had set up the Civilian Oversight Council's operational headquarters. The small room was packed with village elders, merchants, and functionaries arguing over distribution schedules and inventory management. Elder Garrett saw her first. Your Grace, we need decisions on 3 items. First, Silverstream is still refusing to participate in the council but wants relief funds. Second, the grain merchants are price gouging because they know we're desperate. Third, we don't have enough wagons to transport everything before the next storm hits. Silverstream gets funds but through direct duchy allocation, not council channels. They'll come around when they see it working. For the merchants, Elara turned to Lord Pemberton, who'd been observing quietly. Your mining operations need food supplies, correct? Always. Then negotiate bulk purchasing directly with the merchants. Offer them guaranteed contracts through spring in exchange for fair pricing on relief allocations. They get certainty. We get reasonable costs. Pemberton nodded slowly. That could work. They've been nervous about demand fluctuations. And the wagons? Garrett pressed. Requisition them. Under Winter Protocol Authority, I can temporarily commandeer private transportation for emergency use. Compensation at fair rates, return guaranteed when crisis passes. Get what you need. The elders exchanged glances. You're just deciding this? Without consultation, forms, approval processes? The protocols give me emergency authority. I'm using it. If you disagree with specific decisions, tell me and we'll adjust. But bureaucracy during crisis gets people killed, so yes, I'm just deciding. Miriam from Thornhold smiled faintly. Your mother used to say that too. Process is for peacetime. Crisis requires action. She was right. Elara pulled out maps. Show me your distribution routes. I want to understand where supplies are going and how we can optimize delivery. They spent the next hour planning logistics with the kind of granular detail Elara had always found satisfying. Not grand strategy or political maneuvering, just practical problem-solving about tons and distances and weather windows. This was governance stripped to its essential function, keeping people alive. When the meeting finally broke, Elder Thomas from Silverstream approached hesitantly. Your Grace, about our refusal to join the council, you don't trust it yet. That's fair. It's not about trust exactly. It's about Silverstream has survived by staying independent. Every time we've relied on duchy coordination, we've been disappointed. Why should this time be different? Elara studied the older man, seeing decades of learned skepticism in his weathered face. It shouldn't be. You should remain skeptical, watch for failures, hold us accountable. The council isn't about blind trust. It's about structured oversight that makes trust less necessary. You don't have to believe in my good intentions. Just participate in systems that limit my bad ones. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. That's honest, at least. I'm too tired for anything else. He smiled slightly. I'll bring Silverstream's representatives to the next council meeting. Observing, not voting. We'll see how it goes. That's all I ask. Over the following weeks, the relief operations achieved something Elara hadn't quite believed possible. They worked. Not smoothly. There were constant problems, shortages, miscommunications, and minor crises. But supplies reached villages. Children ate regular meals. The desperation that had fueled near rebellion eased into cautious stability. The Oversight Council met weekly, often arguing loudly about priorities and methods, but always reaching eventual decisions. Civilian voices carried weight in governance for the first time in generations, and people were still learning how to use that weight effectively. Elara attended every meeting, usually sitting in the back and only intervening when specifically asked. The council needed to develop its own authority, not just implement her decisions. That required restraint she didn't naturally possess, but Thorne kept reminding her, leaders who can't let go create dependencies, not governance. Commander Varenus implemented military reforms with similar careful attention. Soldiers now swore oaths to territorial defense rather than ducal service. Officer promotions required civilian council approval. Military budgets became subject to public review. The changes made some career soldiers uncomfortable, but younger guards seemed to appreciate clarity about who they actually served. Alistair remained confined to his quarters. Technically still Duke, but functionally powerless. Wickham visited regularly to discuss the ongoing investigation, which was revealing exactly how systematic the financial mismanagement had been. Not just the North March necklace, but years of redirected funds, inappropriate expenditures, and deliberate obfuscation. He's not fighting it anymore, Wickham reported after one session. Just sitting there answering questions mechanically. I think he's broken. Good broken or dangerous broken? Elara asked. Defeated broken. He keeps saying he was trying to help, trying to modernize, trying to improve things. Can't accept that his methods were destructive. Can we prosecute? Technically, yes. Practically, Wickham sighed. The evidence is overwhelming, but prosecution creates problems. He's still the Duke, still has southern relatives who will make trouble, still represents continuity some people value. If we charge him formally, it becomes a prolonged legal battle that divides the court. So we just ignore systematic theft? No. We document it thoroughly, present findings publicly, allow the court to make informed decisions about his future. Let political pressure force resolution rather than legal prosecution. Elara hated that answer, but recognized its wisdom. When's the presentation? 2 weeks. I want documentation absolutely airtight before we go public. The presentation took place in the same great hall where everything had started, but the atmosphere was different now. Less theatrical crisis, more administrative review. Wickham laid out findings with forensic precision. Dates, amounts, authorizations, patterns of systematic misappropriation. The court listened in heavy silence as numbers accumulated into an undeniable picture of governance failure. Not malicious necessarily, but reckless and self-serving enough to cause real harm. When Wickham finished, Elder Garrett stood. What happens now? That's for the court to decide, Wickham said. Under traditional law, the Duke holds his position unless formally removed. Under the new oversight structures, his authority is already limited. The question is whether formal removal serves duchy interests better than constrained continuation. He stole from us, Miriam said bluntly. From villages, from children. He should face consequences. I agree, Lady Ashford said. But what consequences? Exile? Imprisonment? Execution? We need to be specific about what we're proposing. The debate continued for hours, voices rising and falling as people worked through anger, pragmatism, and competing visions of justice. Elara listened without speaking, letting the court find its own resolution. Finally, Lord Pemberton proposed compromise. The Duke retains his title but no governing authority. Purely ceremonial position with no resource allocation power, no military command, no policy influence. He remains confined to the estate with supervised movements. The Duchess assumes full governance under oversight council structures. We avoid the chaos of complete removal while ensuring he can't cause further damage. That's not justice, Garrett protested. That's just containment. Sometimes containment is the most justice we can achieve, Pemberton said quietly. Perfect punishment creates as many problems as perfect forgiveness. This acknowledges wrongdoing while prioritizing stability. The proposal passed with strong majority support. Alistair would remain Duke in name only, a living reminder of governance failure, permanently sidelined but not destroyed. When Wickham delivered the verdict, Alistair accepted it with hollow eyes. I tried to help. You'll realize that eventually. When your reforms fail and the duchy stagnates, you'll remember that I tried to build something greater. You tried to build something different, Elara said, meeting his gaze through the open doorway of his quarters. That's not the same as greater. The North doesn't need to be the South. It needs to be itself. More accountable, more resilient, more honest about human limitation. That's what we're building. With councils and oversight and distributed authority that will paralyze decision-making. Maybe. We'll find out. But at least we'll fail honestly rather than succeed through theft. Alistair turned away, dismissing her without words. Elara left him there, neither forgiven nor destroyed, just permanently irrelevant. Winter deepened, but the villages reported adequate supplies. No crisis shortages, no desperate pleas, just normal winter hardship managed through normal preparations. The Oversight Council's monthly report showed efficient distribution, minimal waste, and growing civilian confidence in governance structures. It's working, Thorne said during one review session. Not perfectly, but functionally. People are fed, supplied, surviving. That's not nothing. It's everything, Elara corrected. Everything else is theater. This keeping people alive through winter is the actual job. Spring arrived slowly, as it always did in the north. Snow persisted through false thaws and late storms before finally, grudgingly, releasing its grip. When the first trade caravans could move through cleared passes, they brought news from southern territories. Lord Herrick had reported the situation as internally resolved through legitimate governance restructuring. Alistair's relatives were furious, but unable to mount effective opposition. Military intervention was politically impossible, and legal challenges foundered against the Winter Protocol's explicit provisions. The Northern Territories had successfully restructured themselves, and the South could do nothing except watch. They'll try something eventually, Vorenus warned. Politics doesn't forgive this easily. Someone will attempt to reverse the changes. Let them try, Elara said. We'll be ready. That's the advantage of distributed authority. There's no single point of failure to exploit. The Winter Protocols formally expired with spring thaw, as their provisions required. The Oversight Council transitioned from emergency authority to permanent governance structure through court ratification. Military reforms became standing policy. Financial transparency became standard practice. The changes that had seemed revolutionary in winter became normal by spring. Elder Garrett approached Elara during one of the final Oversight Council meetings in its emergency configuration. Your Grace, the Council wants to recognize your leadership formally. We're proposing a title change from Duchess Consort to Duchess Regnant, acknowledging that you've been the actual governing authority. That requires the Duke's agreement. The Duke is functionally powerless. The court can override his objections if you support the change. Elara considered it. Duchess Regnant meant formal recognition, legal clarity, permanent authority. It meant the changes couldn't be easily reversed if political winds shifted. Do it, she said, but include provisions for eventual succession through council selection rather than heredity. No more assuming competence based on bloodline. Garrett's eyebrows rose. You're willing to give up dynastic succession? I'm willing to prioritize function over tradition. If my children prove competent, the council can select them. If not, they can choose someone else. Leadership should be earned, not inherited. The proposal passed overwhelmingly. Alistair didn't even bother objecting, just signed the documents with dead eyes and retreated back to his quarters. Elara became Duchess Regnant of the Northern Territories in a quiet ceremony with no pageantry or celebration. Just signatures on documents and formal recognition of authority she'd already been exercising for months. How does it feel? Margot asked afterward. Exactly the same. The title doesn't change the work. Your mother would say that means you're doing it right. Elara thought about her mother often those days. The woman who'd held the duchy together through famine and plague, who'd taught that survival required both strength and flexibility, that northern governance meant serving rather than ruling. She'd learned those lessons finally. Not through her marriage or her title, but through crisis that had forced her to choose between comfort and responsibility. One morning in late spring, Elara rode out to Greymarch with a small escort. The village had recovered remarkably. Children playing in streets, market stalls full of goods, People going about normal business instead of desperate survival. Elder Garrett met her at the village center. "Your Grace, we weren't expecting you." I wanted to see how things looked after winter. They walked through the village together, Garrett pointing out repairs and improvements. The grain storage had been expanded. The medical clinic had new supplies. The school had reopened with a new teacher. "We're managing," Garrett said. "Better than managing. Thriving, relatively speaking. The council system works. Having direct voice in resource allocation, actual treasury access, regular accountability. It makes a difference. Problems? Always. Distribution disputes, personality conflicts, competing priorities. But we work through them. That's the point, isn't it? Not perfection, just functional problem solving." Exactly. They stopped at the village's small memorial, stone markers for residents who died in previous harsh winters. Garrett touched one gently. "My wife, 3 winters ago. Died from fever we couldn't treat because medicine was too expensive and relief funds never arrived." "I'm sorry. I don't tell you for sympathy. I tell you so you understand what this means." He gestured at the healthy village around them. These reforms, this governance structure, it's not abstract politics. It's the difference between life and death. My wife died because the system failed. Other people's wives won't die the same way. That matters. Elara felt the weight of that responsibility settle deeper. "I know. That's why we can't let it fail." "We won't." Garrett's voice was firm. "The council will fight to preserve this because we remember what came before. And we'll hold you accountable to your promises, Your Grace. Not out of hostility, but because we can't afford leaders who forget what governance actually means." I wouldn't expect anything less. Riding back to the capital, Elara thought about accountability and survival and the fragile structures holding civilization together. She'd gambled everything on the idea that distributed authority worked better than concentrated power. And so far, barely, imperfectly, it seemed to be true. But the work wasn't finished, would never be finished. Each season brought new challenges, new crises, new opportunities for systems to fail or people to betray trust. Eternal vigilance wasn't just a saying, it was the actual price of functional governance. Back at the capital, she found a letter waiting from Seline. The younger woman had settled in a southern coastal city and opened a trading house, apparently thriving through actual competence rather than beauty and connections. "Your Grace," the letter read, "I heard about your formal recognition as Duchess Regnant. Congratulations on achieving through merit what most people inherit through accident of birth. I'm managing a textile import business now. Turns out I'm good with numbers and negotiations when I actually try. Thank you for the second chance. I won't waste it." Elara smiled and filed the letter away. Everyone deserved opportunities to become better than their worst choices. That evening, she stood at the window of her mother's old study, her study now, watching snow dust the courtyard in one final spring flurry. The Northern Territories didn't give up winter easily. Even in warmth, cold lingered as reminder and warning. Commander Vorenus found her there. "Your Grace, the summer trade delegations are requesting formal meetings. They want to understand the new governance structures before committing to agreements. Schedule them. We'll explain the changes clearly and let them decide if they want to work with us under new terms." Some will refuse. They prefer dealing with concentrated authority, easier to bribe or manipulate. Then we're better off without them. I'd rather have fewer agreements we can honor than many will break. Vorenus nodded. "The soldiers are asking about you." "What about me? Whether you're planning to marry again, whether there will be heirs, whether the succession provisions mean instability." Elara laughed shortly. "Tell them I'm too busy governing to think about marriage. Any children will earn their positions like everyone else, and stability comes from good systems, not bloodlines." I'll phrase it more diplomatically. "You do that." He left, and Elara returned to reviewing the next week's council agenda. Supply negotiations, infrastructure repairs, preliminary planning for next winter. The same essential work continuing regardless of titles or political structures. Months became seasons. The reforms solidified from emergency measures into permanent governance. The Oversight Council developed its own procedures and precedents. Military independence became accepted rather than controversial. Financial transparency became expectation rather than innovation. The Northern Territories stabilized into something new, Not the traditional duchy of concentrated power, nor the southern model of aristocratic control, but a hybrid that honored frontier practicality while adding structural accountability. It wasn't perfect. Arguments still erupted over priorities. Resources remained limited. Winter still killed the unprepared. But the system worked. Imperfectly, inconsistently, but functionally. 2 years after the midnight assembly that had changed everything, Elder Miriam arrived at the capital with surprising news. Silverstream wants to join the Oversight Council. Full participation, voting membership. Elder Thomas sent me to negotiate terms. Elara had been reviewing grain inventory reports and looked up in surprise. Thomas changed his mind? Watching the system work for 2 years changed his mind. Silverstream survived last winter better than any previous year because relief supplies actually arrived when needed. He's still skeptical, but he's practical. The council works, so Silverstream will participate. What terms is he proposing? None. He'll accept standard membership with same rights and responsibilities as other villages. He just wants it noted that Silverstream maintains philosophical opposition to concentrated authority, even while participating in distributed governance. Elara smiled. We can note that. Welcome Silverstream to the council. The addition felt significant. The last major holdout accepting that the new structures serve survival better than stubborn independence. That spring, Lady Ashford approached with different news. Your Grace, the Southern Territories are watching us. Not with hostility anymore, but curiosity. Some of their minor lords are asking about implementing similar oversight councils in their own regions. Really? Apparently our governance model is gaining reputation for efficiency and stability. When your reforms survive long enough to become precedent rather than rebellion, people get interested. Let them be interested, we'll share information about what works and what doesn't, but they'll need to adapt principles to their own circumstances. Copying structures without understanding context just creates different failures. I'll convey that diplomatically. You're all very diplomatic lately. I'm clearly a bad influence. Ashford laughed. You're teaching us that honesty can be diplomatic when it's offered constructively. That's not bad influence, it's better strategy. On the 3rd anniversary of her birthday banquet, the night everything had broken and rebuilt, Elara held a quiet dinner with her core advisors. Not a celebration exactly, just acknowledgement of survival and adaptation. 3 years, Governor Thorne said, raising his glass. 3 years of councils and oversight and distributed authority that supposedly couldn't work. And yet here we are, fed, stable, functional. Barely functional some days, Elara corrected. Barely is enough. Perfect doesn't exist in frontier governance. They drank to that, to barely functional systems that nonetheless kept people alive. Later, alone in her study, Elara pulled out the old documents from that first crisis. The treasury records showing theft, the letters from desperate villages, the North March necklace inventory listing, evidence of systematic failure that had forced reconstruction. She kept them not as trophies, but as reminders. Reminders that governance required constant vigilance, that power concentrated became power corrupted, that survival depended on structures stronger than individual virtue. A knock interrupted her reflection. Margot entered with a small package. This arrived from the south, Your Grace. From someone named Seline. Elara opened it to find a beautifully crafted account ledger and a note. For tracking your successes as carefully as you tracked failures. You've built something remarkable. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. S. The gesture was unexpected and oddly touching. Elara set the ledger on her desk and made a note to send thanks. The next morning brought news that Alistair had died peacefully in his sleep. Not old, but not young either, just worn down by irrelevance and regret. The court received the information with quiet acknowledgement, but no real mourning. He'd been functionally gone for years. Death just made it official. Funeral arrangements? Wickham asked. Appropriate for his station. Respectful but not elaborate. He was Duke, even if he failed at it. We honor the position. The funeral drew small attendance, protocol observers, not genuine mourners. Elara stood through the ceremony with appropriate solemnity, thinking about the man she'd married and how completely they'd both changed from those early hopeful days. He'd wanted transformation through grand vision. She'd achieved it through patient restructuring. Both had been right about need for change, just completely wrong about methods. With Alistair's death, The duchy's succession question became concrete rather than theoretical. The Oversight Council convened to discuss future leadership. The provisions specify council selection, Elder Garrett reminded everyone. We're not bound by heredity. We can choose whoever demonstrates competence. But continuity matters, Lord Pemberton countered. Constantly changing leadership creates instability. They debated for hours before reaching consensus. Elara would continue as Duchess Regnant, with formal 5-year reviews where the council could choose to continue or replace her based on governance performance. So every 5 years, I'm evaluated? Elara asked. Every 5 years, we all are, Miriam corrected. The whole system gets reviewed. Council effectiveness, military independence, financial transparency. Leadership accountability is part of that. I can accept those terms. The arrangement formalized what had been implicit, governance as earned responsibility rather than inherited right, subject to ongoing accountability and possible replacement. Years continued passing. The Northern Territories developed reputation for stable, if unorthodox, governance. Trade increased. Population grew. The border villages that had faced starvation began thriving through combination of local autonomy and duchy coordination. Elara aged into the role, not the young woman trying to preserve a failing marriage, but a leader who'd learned that survival required systems stronger than individual virtue. Her hair showed gray at the temples. Her face carried lines from worry and decision-making. She looked like what she was, someone who'd fought winter and won, then kept fighting because winter always returned. On a cold evening 10 years after the Midnight Assembly, she stood at the same window where she'd watched snowfall and court gather for her disastrous birthday banquet. The view hadn't changed. Same courtyard, same stone walls, same winter pressing against civilization. But everything else was different. Elder Garrett's grandson now represented Greymarch on the Oversight Council, bringing fresh perspective to established structures. Commander Varanus had retired, training a successor who'd never known the old system of ducal military control. The Treasury operated with transparency that would have been unthinkable a decade ago. The reforms had survived long enough to become tradition. Margot entered quietly. Your Grace, the Council is asking about next year's relief fund allocations. They want your input. They don't need my input. They have authority to decide. They value your experience. Then I'll attend as advisor, not decision-maker. That's the whole point of distributed authority. Margot smiled. Your mother would be proud. You've built something that doesn't need you. That's the only thing worth building. Systems that function regardless of who's leading them. She returned to her work, reviewing proposals and signing authorizations, doing the unglamorous administrative labor that kept civilization functional. This was what governance actually meant, not grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but patient attention to logistics and accountability. Outside, snow fell heavy and constant, beginning another winter that would test everything they'd built. The Northern Territories would endure because they always endured, not through individual strength, but through collective commitment to survival. Elara had learned that lesson thoroughly, had paid for it through humiliation and crisis and reconstruction, had built it into structures that might outlast her. That was enough. Not perfect, not complete, but enough. She'd started as a duchess trying to save a marriage while preserving appearance. She'd become a leader who understood that survival required truth over comfort, accountability over authority, and systems over personalities. The transformation hadn't been smooth or easy, but it had been real. And in the harsh Northern Territories where winter tested everything, reality was the only thing that mattered.